So look, before I start, here's a question, and I know you all have an answer. How are things going in business right now? Good. When I ask that question, we do get people like Mike who says it's unbelievable. We just need to check if that's unbelievably bad or unbelievably good. But I get people who say it's absolutely brilliant, Carol. And then on the other end of the scale, we get people who say it's absolutely awful. But just for a moment, consider what is the difference between successful people and unsuccessful people. And it seems successful people do things differently inside. So in this short session, if I could show you whether what you're doing inside is moving you forward in terms of branding yourself or moving you in the other direction, would that be useful? Would there be value in that for you? They say your level of success is dependent on your level of thinking. So if you would just imagine for a moment 100 billion neurons constantly wiring and firing inside of you. And what that means is every time you repeat the same thought, the same action, the same emotion, communicate the same way, it strengthens the way those neurons wire and fire together. Let me give you an experience of this. So what I want you to do is quickly turn to the person next to you or near you and give them your biggest, brightest smile. Okay, so turn to someone, give them a smile. Now, what happens? What happens when somebody smiles at you? You smile back. The natural reaction is to smile back. And that's because we're hardwired that way. That's the way your neurons wire and fire. So the smile is the trigger. The conditioned response is to smile back. And we have certain conditioned responses to lots of different triggers. Some are good, some are bad, and some are ugly. So in this session, I want to talk to you about triggers and conditioned responses to you, your brand, and your organization. And more importantly, how you can change those triggers and conditioned responses. So let's start at the beginning, or let's start by taking a deeper look at what's going on inside. So as we dig deeper into the 21st century, I'm sure you'll agree that change is a given. And just consider how most people respond to change. It's kind of like thanks, but no thanks. So what do you think is the biggest barrier to change? What do you think creates that resistance to change? Fear. Fear. Is it that people just want things to stay the same? You know, we like being in that comfort zone. So fear is a big barrier. Resistance, wanting to stay in the comfort zone, but actually none of them are right. None of them are the biggest barrier, because the biggest barrier to change is actually your very own conscious mind. It's your conscious mind, and the reason I say that is because your conscious mind is hardwired to constantly analyze, criticize, and judge everything that's going on, from what I'm wearing, what I'm saying, what your competitors are doing, their products, their services. It's analytical, it's critical, it's judgmental, it's also reactive. So think of your conscious mind like a computer screen or monitor with a keyboard. And you react and respond to what comes up on the screen. You can also key in information for it to appear on the screen. But just for a moment, consider nothing appears on that screen. Nothing appears on the screen unless the screen and the keyboard are connected to the hard drive. And your hard drive is essentially your unconscious mind. It's where you store all your programs and patterns. Now, your unconscious mind is essentially a recording and playback device. And here's the other thing, it's 1 million times more powerful than the conscious mind. 1 million times more powerful. So just for a moment, think about who's running you, who's running your organization, your brand. Actually, it's the patterns you have stored on your hard drive at the unconscious mind, at the unconscious level. And they estimate that 95% of the time, we're operating from programs and patterns that are stored at the unconscious level, 95% of the time. And that means that even when you consciously think you're making a decision, you're not. That decision is based on previous decisions you've made, previous experiences, and what's stored on your hard drive. So change is also part of the unconscious processes. It's at the unconscious level that we really truly create change. So just consider, have any of you had the experience where you're driving along, and I'm sure you've had this experience, somebody cuts you up in traffic? A normal, everyday event here, I would say. So you get cut up in traffic, and you get angry, you get stressed. So you say to yourself consciously, you know, the next time that happens, I'm going to remain relaxed and calm and in control. I'm not going to let it bother me. 10 minutes later, you get cut up in traffic, and instantly you get upset, you get angry, you get stressed. Why? When you told yourself that you would remain calm. The fact is, you've only told your conscious mind that you're going to remain calm, and all information hits the unconscious level first, and then you respond and react based on the programs and patterns stored on your hard drive at the unconscious level. Are you with me? Yes. So is it possible to change those programs and patterns on the hard drive? And when I work with individuals and organizations, what I do is first help them start recognizing the patterns and programs that they're operating from. Then we can start to redefine the triggers for you, your brand, and your organization, your products and services. You know, as human beings, we are creatures of patterns and habits. And it's our patterns in thinking and behavior that create our response to circumstances, and not the circumstances themselves. So how many of you used an alarm clock to wake up this morning? So the alarm clock is the trigger. What's the conditioned response? You get up, or more likely hit the snooze button and take another 15. If you drove here today, then the red traffic light is a trigger, the conditioned response. Anyway, so when you see a red traffic light, that's a trigger. The conditioned response is you stop. When you see a green traffic light, then that's a trigger. The conditioned response is to go. And then in your organizations, when you call a meeting, what's the conditioned response? Oh, great, another meeting to share my creative ideas. Or, oh no, not another meeting. Does that sound more like it? So, just for a moment, consider that you, yourself, are also a trigger that elicits a certain conditioned response in other people. When people see you, when they hear your name, when they hear you speak, when they see your website, you trigger a certain response in other people. What is that response? Is it, oh no? Or is it, oh yes? And more importantly, which response do you want to elicit in other people? Because I know which response I'd rather elicit in other people. Now, conditioned response is nothing new. It dates back to the early 1900s. And there was a guy, an American doctor called Dr. Bill Twitmeyer. And his work was picked up by Ivan Pavlov. And many of you will be familiar with his famous experiment with dogs. So for those of you who haven't come across Ivan Pavlov and his salivating dogs, let me tell you the story. What he did was he took a pack of dogs, and when they were hungry, he'd feed them a big fat juicy steak, and they'd salivate, and he'd ring a bell. And he did that again and again and again. So when the dogs were hungry, he'd show them a big fat juicy steak, and he'd ring a bell, they'd salivate. He did it again and again and again, so much to the point where he could just ring the bell and the dogs would salivate even though there was no meat there. Why? Because the meat and the bell had been equated as being exactly the same. So whether he showed them the meat or the bell, the dogs still salivated. And it took behavioral psychologists all that time to realize that as human beings, we are also lean, mean, conditioned machines. And in fact, most intelligent branding and marketing is about trigger and response. So I'm not sure if any of you remember the old Pepsi ads. There's a great example there. Pepsi used to spend a lot of money getting the likes of Michael Jackson or Britney Spears to appear in their advertisements. So what they noticed was that the likes of Michael Jackson and Britney Spears got people into a heightened state of excitement and awareness. and they wanted people to feel that way about Pepsi, their product. So they filmed Britney Spears in concert. At the height of the experience, she picks up a can or a bottle of Pepsi and drinks it. And that forms the basis of their campaign. And they repeat that campaign through all the media channels. It's shown everywhere. And that means that when people see Britney, they think Pepsi. When they see Pepsi, they think Britney and get into that state of excitement. So the challenge for you and for your brands, your products, your services is changing consumers' behavior so they feel and behave differently when they see you, your brand, your organization, to change the triggers and the conditioned responses. So is it possible to teach Pavlov's dogs new tricks?